It's a complicated name. Actually, the Tharp part is an English name. Mm-hmm. It's just a very rare variant of Thorpe. But yes, my Christian name, Lars, is a good old gutsy Scandinavian name.
So how old were you when you came to England?
I was 6. In fact, I was 6 on the very day that the boat ploughed its way over from Esbjerg to Harwich.
How much do you remember about your childhood, the first 6 years or so in Denmark?
Well, I remember a great deal. My grandfather was quite an influence on me in the early years, and he was keeper of antiquities at the National Museum in Copenhagen, and so he dragged me around any opportunity he could find to drag me around the corridors of the museums. That was quite a big influence. And the city itself, I don't know, have you been to Copenhagen?
No, I have actually been to Copenhagen.
Well, it's a wonderful city, and it's a very civilized city. It's a manageable scale. It's quite picturesque. It's got lots of wonderful museums and art galleries, and yet at the same time, it's quite provincial in feel. So I love going back there. It was a deep-rooted part of my early years, definitely. But so is Leicester. I mean, I spent a long time in Leicester, right from the age of 6, right through to going off to university in and around Leicester.
In terms of culture, in terms of the various art galleries, museums and so on, and very much the Danish heritage, there seems to be a great respect in the country amongst Danes for their culture and their roots and so on. Is that fair to say?
Well, it's interesting you say that. I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about this. I think the Danes don't actually, aren't, especially of my generation, aren't sufficiently aware of their wonderful and quite recent past. The Danish economy is essentially an agrarian economy. They were farmers, basically, and there was a smattering of what we would call aristocracy. It's very, very much of a sort of Hans Andersen country with princes and princesses, but everything within a relatively manageable scale. There are only 5 million people in Denmark. And I think that they aren't quite as aware of their culture as they ought to be. I mean, it never ceases to surprise me when any particularly good Danish artist, a chap, for example, called Jens Juel, a great Danish artist, when his paintings come up for sale, the Danes don't pay for them. They won't pay serious money for Danish art. But it's a paradox, because you're quite right. The actual quality of the museums, the quality of the looking after the culture is absolutely wonderful, and it mixes in with the whole nature of the country. It's a wonderful place to visit.
So how much do you remember about your first day in Leicester then, when you arrived here? Because it's very different to Copenhagen, isn't it?
It was, and Leicester is about as far as you can get from the sea. Well, in Denmark, the furthest you can get from the sea is half an hour. So having sat in the back of my grandfather's old Wolsey, driving 4.5 hours into the hinterland of England, I did begin to have a sense of unease that, the sea was a long way away. I suppose my first memories were of going to Overdale School down in Knighton, and not knowing a word of English, and then being stuck into a class. And there are certain basic necessary phrases that if you arrive in England only speaking Danish, you would be well equipped to have. And one of them is, "Please, miss, can I go to the toilet?" And I do remember getting back to my home rather wetter than I went in the morning. There had always been this undertow. My Danish grandfather was a classicist and an archaeologist, and I was always interested in history for that reason. And I know certainly that by year 3, when I was in Mr. Bowley's form, and anybody out there listening remembers Mr. Bowley, my French master, a very good French master, he asked me the same question when I was, I suppose, 14. And I said, yes, I want to do archaeology and anthropology at Cambridge.
Now, after Cambridge, it was straight on to Sotheby's, more or less, wasn't it?
The jobs for archaeologists are few and far between, even more the case today than it was then. And it was clearly going to be difficult getting a job. And I thought, well, hang on, what else can I do? What do I want to do if I can't do this? My college was particularly good at Chinese. There was a master there called Joseph Needham, who perhaps arguably is the greatest Western Chinese scholar ever. He sort of galvanized the college with his own knowledge, and this had sort of stayed on with me. And I thought, I want to know more about this. And I thought the best way of finding out more about the material culture of China is to join one of the big auction houses. Sotheby's was the most eminent auction house at that time in Chinese works of art. And I thought, well, that's the place to go. And, well, to cut a very long story short, after serving a bit of apprenticeship in one or two local auction houses here in Leicester, I managed to get the foot onto the right level, and I got an interview, and I was taken on as an apprentice.
So do you remember getting the original phone call from the BBC?
Well, it was actually David Batty who said to me one day, Lars, how do you feel like coming along to have a look at how one of these is made? And I said, oh, yes, I'd love to. And I've been on it ever since. People are interested in values. And I think that certainly is a very large part of it. But it's certainly not all. I think it's the human interest. It's the actual story behind the object. It's how the expert relates to the owner of the object. It's the stories that they can bring out. Sometimes the interviews that we do are quite dry and rather unengaging, but the ones that one remembers are the ones where there's a real relationship between the expert and the object and the person, and those are the ones we like doing.
As always, if you enjoyed this interview, please click on the like button, ring that notification bell so that you don't miss out in the future, and if you possibly can, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you.